Am I good? Okay, good, excellent. And I was told to not start until I see certain people in the pews, and they're not here yet, but they're just going to miss out, so it's okay. So my name is Tim Brown. I'm a pastor in the ELCA. I've served churches in Chicago and in Raleigh, and right now I serve as the Director for Congregational Stewardship for the whole ELCA, which means that I find myself in different churches all over the country, depending on the Sunday and depending on the week and whatnot. In 2 weeks I'll be in New York, and then I'll be in San Francisco. But I'm really happy to be in Cary because I can go home after this, which will be nice. I have a couple of hobbies in my life. One of them is being a dad. That's obviously my biggest hobby. That's the most important part of my work right now. My son's Finley. He's 11. He's a baseball player, and he plays for the Braves, and it's the only time I root for the Braves. Otherwise, I'm a Cubs fan. My son Alistair is 9 years old. He's a soccer player. That's where he is this morning, actually. He was called last minute because a teammate for another team couldn't make it, and they asked Alistair if he'll step in. So Alistair's playing for some team this morning. I'm not sure which one, but usually he plays for the Scorpions. And they have an undefeated record. We're really happy about that, and they just played their last official game yesterday. His team, before he joined this league, though, was called the Fighting Artichokes, and I liked that name a lot better. I wish that the Fighting Artichokes could have happened with this one. So being a dad is my biggest hobby. I also am a runner and do some 5Ks and 10Ks and half marathons every year. I did one marathon, and that was great, but enough. So I don't know that I'll ever do a full again. But the other thing, which is really interesting to me, is I'm very into Celtic spirituality, Celtic Christian spirituality, especially because that's my family heritage. And that led me to be interested in the saints of the church. And so I study the lives of the saints, and I know that that's not very interesting to most people, but that also means that I specialize in something that not anybody else does, which is kind of cool. How many of you know that the Lutheran Church has a calendar of saints? Does anybody? You didn't? Most people don't realize the Lutheran Church has a calendar of saints. It follows loosely the calendar of saints that the Roman and Orthodox churches have, but there's some big differences. Obviously, one of the big differences, the Lutheran Church includes Lutheran saints, and you're not going to find any Lutherans on the Orthodox or Catholic calendars for the saints. And another big difference is the Lutheran Church also has folks in remembrance for commemorations and saint days that aren't on any other calendar anywhere, because the Lutherans have a very different kind of definition of what it means to be a saint. When I do my calendar of saints, and I'm in talks with the ELCA on revising the calendar of saints right now, this is one of the projects that I'll be working on in 2026, revising the Lutheran calendar of saints, to add some more saints like Thurgood Marshall, who's included in the Episcopal calendar of saints, but not in any other one, and I think we need to add him in the Lutheran calendar of saints. And I'm going to include a couple of other ones that I'm proposing we add to the Lutheran calendar of saints in this presentation today. We have saints for almost every day. Which is kind of cool, and nobody knows anything about them. I've tried to pick out some weird ones for you, though, okay? There are many more weird ones than just these, but I tried to pick out some weird ones. But let's just really, if you're curious how saints are canonized, in the Roman Church and in the Orthodox Church, there are three major steps. And that's why canonization takes a long time in the Roman and Orthodox churches. So in the Roman Church, after death, there is usually a 5-year moratorium. After 5 years, they become a servant of God. Now, this has been suspended for some folks. So Pope John Paul II, they suspended the 5-year moratorium. Mother Teresa, they suspended the 5-year moratorium. They were like, these people obviously live lives worthy of sainthood. So we're like, we're just going to fast forward. So they do that, and then they become a servant of God. And after they become a servant of God, a deep dive is done into their life. And deep dive should be quotations there, because usually it's perfunctory, especially for like I said, Mother Teresa, or if they're very popular, like if they're very popular people, the Roman church will be like, we'll just go ahead with this, right? And so they just move. So they're very popular, and we're going to have some very popular people up here that became saints and probably shouldn't have. So, at least in the Roman idea. So then they do a deep dive, and then they have to have 3 identified miracles. 3 identified miracles in the world post-death. Those have to be post-death. 3 identified miracles post-death. Now, Lutherans are generally allergic to that idea, right? And so obviously we don't have these stipulations on ours. By the way, the miracles, like I said, they can be waived if they're martyred because they consider the martyrdom to be a miracle, right, in and of itself. So this is what the Roman saints, these are how these are canonized. And we actually have two saint days. We have All Saints Day, which is November 1st, and then we have All Souls Day, which is November 2nd. All Souls Day is for everybody who's not canonized. That's who you remember. All Saints Day is for those who are canonized. That's in the Roman tradition. In the Lutheran tradition, we only have 2 requirements. 1, they have to be dead. And 2, they have to have died in the faith. And even that one's a little fuzzy. And I'm going to tell you a couple of saints that we consider to be saints who may not have been Christian or may have been on the margins, right? So these are the only 2 requirements for Lutheran calendars of saints, which really is both good and bad. Because it's good in the fact that we have a low bar, because we honor what Luther said, everyone is a sinner and a saint, right? But it's bad because then we have a multiplicity of choices for any day, and so you have to kind of narrow it down and decide what you're going to do. As the Blessed Martin Luther said, the saints are sinners too, but they are forgiven and absolved. Any questions on this so far? Then we're going to get to the saints. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's a great question. It depends which Catholic theologian you're talking to, all right? and the reason I say that is because, like, let's say Mother Teresa, for instance, right? I mean, they were just lining up miracles to attribute to Mother Teresa. Same thing for Pope John Paul II, right? They were just lining up miracles to give to that guy. So there's just, it just depends, right? Honestly, it's largely a popularity contest at this point. You may have heard of the saint who just died. He was 15. He was known as the Gen Z saint. Does anybody remember who he is? I can't remember his name. He was very popular on TikTok. And the Catholic Church has moved quickly to beatify him because he was super popular on TikTok, right? And we shake our heads at this sort of thing, right? And we kind of scoff at this sort of thing. But remember that what they're trying to do is lift up the lives of people who lived good lives. That's what they're really trying to do. And that's what the saints are. So I'm actually all for quick beatification. And I'm all for quick beatification because if we can lift up the truth that there are good people who die in this world and we can emulate them and live lives like them, that to me seems like a good thing. Especially because some of the saints that they did beatify are real losers. And that's okay. Every saint's a little bit of a loser. Right? You can quote me on that. Every saint's a little bit of a loser. In fact, I think the first one up here is a loser. I'm going to talk about him. But that doesn't mean, though, that doesn't mean they're not worth remembering. But I would say that there are a lot of folks who are less losery that are worth remembering more, right? Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay, cool. All right. Yes. Yes. Yeah, for Martin Luther, that was a big piece. She said, it looks like that this definition, anybody could be a saint. Correct. For Martin Luther, that was a big piece. Martin Luther, part of Luther's problem with the Roman idea of what a saint was is that they were putting people on pedestals just arbitrarily. And his big thing is, we're all sinners and we're all saints. And this comes from his idea that he tried to lead a blameless life and failed miserably. And to him, that felt like a failure. But he came to realize that by the grace of God, that was all of us, right? That was all of us. So you too can be a saint. All right, so here's the first saint I want to lift up, St. Augustine, or if you're Catholic, St. Augustine, right? And that's really the difference. Lutherans say Augustine and Catholics say Augustine. He's a 4th century saint from Hippo. And the reason I bring him up, he was super influential to Martin Luther, obviously, right? We remember, Martin Luther was an Augustinian, right? He was an Augustinian monk. He followed this guy. The problem with St. Augustine is he was a wild child. His whole childhood, he was a wild child. He was a fornicator. He had a baby before he was born, and his kid was a super nice guy and went on to do really great things. But he was heavily influential. He coined the phrase, "Lord, give me chastity, but not yet." Right? So this is Saint Augustine, right? He was a bishop of Hippo for 35 years. He created the rule of life. So when he became a bishop and when he became a Christian, he created the rule of life. And this is the rule that's still followed today by so many in monastic orders on how to live each day, right? Prayer, meditation, sermon, singing together, working together, and then day with prayer, meditation. And he also, I think, theologically created a lot of problems because he had issues with sex and desire. Because of his wild childhood, he had problems with sex and desire. This is where a lot of Christian guilt comes when it comes to sex and desire. It's from Augustine, because he was the one who said that sin was passed on through the sexual act. This was his thing, right? But it's not because that's theologically correct, and in fact, I would say that that's theologically bankrupt. It's because he had problems with it, right? So much of our theology can be influenced by the theologian rather than the truth. We need to remember that. So he's an unusual saint, though, because he led a wild child life, and he should not be in the calendar. He's an official Catholic saint, though. So he's on the Catholic order, he's on the Orthodox order, and he's on the Lutheran order. So he's remembered in all of them. Any thoughts about Augustine? That's not a real portrait, by the way. I usually put who wrote the icons on these, and by the way, when you make an icon, you write them, you don't paint them. Icons are written because they're said to be pictures, words in picture. That's why they do that. But I forgot to include these on these slides, and I'm sorry.
Where is Hippo?
Hippo, anybody? Africa, thank you, yeah. Yeah, and he was a reluctant bishop of Hippo, by the way. He didn't want to become bishop of Hippo. If you follow me on the Book of Faith, which you're welcome to do, I usually have them every day. So today's St. Martin de Porres, and I always put who writes the icons on those, so that's it. So the next one is a dog. Yeah, I know, right? How cool, right? So by the way, this is not on the Catholic Book of Saints, but I proposed him to be on the Lutheran Book of Saints. And St. Guinefort is the dog's name, and he was a very good boy. So here's how St. Guinefort is actually followed and revered by many Catholics, many Christians, especially if they're Franco, so if they're in France, or if they're Celtic. The Celtics also do this, because the Celtics have a similar story. And you know what else has a similar story? Is in India, right? So the Martoma Church in India has a similar story. Rikki Tikki Tavi. How many of you guys know Rikki Tikki Tavi? Right? A couple of you? It's a mongoose in that one, right? A mongoose? Well, in France, he's a dog. And in Ireland and in Scotland, he's also a dog called Gellert, or Gallard there. So, but Guinevere the Hound, the story goes, Guinevere the Hound is guarding the child in a bassinet, and a snake, an asp, comes in, right? And so what does Guinevere the Hound do? He kills the asp, right? And there's a big bloody scene, and the bassinet is overturned, and the baby's in there, and they walk in, and Guinevere's got blood on his jowls because he's killed the snake. And the father, the hunter, comes in and sees that the bassinet is overturned, there's blood everywhere, and so he kills the dog because he assumes that the dog has killed the baby. But they hear the crying, and underneath the bassinet is the baby. And so, in remorse, he sets up an altar to Guinefort. You can see this outside of Lyons, France. There's still a place where you can go and venerate Saint Guinefort there. And it's a testament to don't go on your first instinct. Don't judge a book by its cover, right? This is kind of the moralistic tale with Saint Guinefort. So there's a place, there are people who still do this for protection for babies. People ask Saint Guinefort to protect their babies. This happens still today, especially in France and Celtic circles and whatnot. And you can go to the stones where they buried Saint Guinefort, allegedly. The Catholic Church very against this. They do not like this idea. There was big kind of persecution against the people who practiced the cult of St. Guinevere, is what they said, except the fact that when people get it in their minds, you can't stop them from doing it. So even though the Catholic Church said no, the French were like, ho, ho, ho. You cannot tell us what to do. And they still do it anyway. And so we find that everywhere. So St. Guinevere, the Hound, August 22nd, 13th century. He was a very good boy. And you find this story in so many cultures. All right, St. Juniper the Fool. Anybody know St. Juniper the Fool? Anybody heard of St. Juniper the Fool? All right. St. Juniper had a habit of giving everything away, which really ticked everybody off, especially the church, because he was a follower of St. Francis of Assisi. You guys know St. Francis, right? He's not included up here. We can talk more about him. He's got a very complicated life, by the way. Everybody remembers St. Francis for loving animals, but he actually had a death wish. He tried to get killed in the Crusades. He did his best to get killed, and it never happened, to his dismay. He was a very complicated person, St. Francis was. And his talking to animals probably was signs of some mental illness rather than just like a genuine love for animals. Anyway, so we have St. Juniper, who was a follower of St. Francis. And he had these extreme tendencies where he would give away his stuff all the time. And so, like, he would come back to the abbey naked, right? And it's because he had found people along the way who needed clothes. And he would just give it all away, and then he'd walk into it naked. And they're like, listen, you can't do this anymore, right? So the church said, you can't give anything, you can't give your stuff away anymore. He was censured by the church for doing this. And so he was just censured by the church. The bishop had said, look, you can't give away your clothes anymore. You can't give away our stuff anymore. You can't do this anymore. And he walks out the door, and he encounters a beggar who has ratty and torn clothes. And he said, and St. Juniper says to the beggar, I have been told not to give you anything that I own, but if you take it, I will not fight you. And that was what he adopted. St. Francis says that he wishes that he had a grove of junipers to do the work in the world. So St. Juniper, May 14th, 13th century. There's a lot of 13th century saints on this list, by the way. Okay, St. Olga, Princess of Kiev. Oh, she's cool. Okay, so she's the first Russian Christian leader of what then was the Russian territory anymore, and apparently is trying to become again, but we won't get into that. So she was courageous, and she sticks it to the man continually. So, for instance, her husband, so the way she became the ruler of Russia is her husband died, right? So her husband died, so she becomes the ruler of Russia, and he had been trying to do all these social reforms to take care of the poor and to help the sick and to take care of the needy. She's known as Saint Olga the Good. And her husband had been trying to do all these things and couldn't get him through. And then St. Olga comes into power, and she gets him done, right? She gets him done. And she was just, the leaders and the lawmakers at the time, she just knew how to work them and get them to do what she wanted to do to help the poor and the needy. St. Olga the Good. She went to Constantinople to meet the emperor, and the emperor fell in love with her. She was so beautiful and so wonderful. And so the emperor of Constantinople says, please, you must marry me. And she says, I will consider it, but first I need to be baptized, because she at that time had been a convert but had not yet been baptized. And who better to baptize you than in Constantinople, right, by the Pope? And so she goes to Constantinople. The emperor wants to marry her. She says, first I must need to be baptized. And he says, oh, sure, we can do that. And so he calls the Pope in, and she says, well, I need a godfather. And she says to the emperor, would you be my godfather? And he says, of course, I would love to be your godfather. And so she gets baptized. And then her godfather, the emperor, comes to her and says, now we can get married. And she says, we are now family. I cannot marry you. Not even the heathens do that. And the emperor relented, and she went back to Russia. And she died peacefully at old age in 969. She was a wily, good princess. By the way, if you have questions about any of these, raise your hand, because I forget details sometimes, and sometimes your questions jog my memory. Okay. Martin Luther. All right, so 16th century, February 18th. Does anybody know Martin Luther's birthday? November 10th, it's coming up, it's coming up. One of my best friend's children was born on November 10th, and I always wish him happy birthday on his behalf, on Martin Luther's behalf. Okay, so here's the thing with Martin Luther. Martin Luther was racked by, he's an unlikely saint. He's an unlikely saint. He's very imperfect. He was racked by guilt, right? There are the stories of him lying prostrate naked on the ground, trying to atone for sins. He would go to his confessor all the time, and he would just have a litany of sins. I mean, he was the guy, you know there's those people in your life who show up at your door and you roll your eyes? That was Martin Luther for his confessor, for his priest. Because he would show up and he'd just have a litany, like a list of everything he'd done wrong in the last 24 hours, and he'd go through them painstakingly, step by step by step, these things. And finally, his confessor said, look, Martin, go sin and then come back to me, right? Because he was doing this all the time. But here's the thing. What he realized, because he could never atone for his sins, he could never feel like it was enough, nothing was enough, he finally realized there's no such thing as enough, which was a blessing for all of us, because now we don't have to spend our life atoning for our sins. Instead, we can rely on grace and live into graceful living rather than atonement living. It's funny, he was the most prolific author of his day. He happened to be born at the same time that the printing press was. He published more than any other author of his day because nobody else had access like he did. And by the way, of theologians, he's probably still the most prolific theologian author to date. The published works that he has, not just his official writings, but also his tableside readings and all sorts of things, right? He snuck his wife out of a convent in a barrel, right? Do we know this story? Do we all know this story? All right, we're going to get to Katie Luther at the end. I include her in there, sneak peek. But there were these nuns, and the lore, it's probably lore, goes that he snuck them out in fish barrels, and he got them all married except for one, and then he married her. So that's Katie Luther. He did change the world by sticking to his principles, and he would hate that we call him a saint. He would hate that I call him a saint. He would hate that because for him, everyone was a saint, and they didn't need special titles. He would hate that. And he was cranky in his old age. The older he got, the sicker he got, the angrier he got at the world. And this is partly why the Lutheran Church has had to denounce many of his writings, especially his late writings. They were anti-Semitic, and they were clearly signs of mental illness and struggling that happened at the end. And it's important for us to acknowledge that. Also, we can acknowledge that because how many people in our lives also have this issue? It's just true. Maybe we'll have that one day. It's just true. We need to be honest about the fact that these people can still be saints. May none of us be remembered for the worst things we ever did. Please. On his deathbed, his final words, which I still love, we are beggars, this is true. Yes, Georgina.
Was his writing about the peasants and the Peasants' War towards the end of his life or earlier?
Well, the Peasants' War happened toward the end of his life. She asked, was his writing about the peasants and the Peasants' War toward the end of his life earlier? So that happened toward the end of his life, the Peasants' War and all of that. There were parts of Martin Luther, he was a terrible politician. And that's part of the problem, too, is he was trying to make folks happy who just couldn't be made happy or wouldn't be made happy. So this was part of it. Yes, please.
Why is February 18th his day?
Because that's the day he died. So most of the dates for their commemorations are the days he died. They died. She or he died. There are exceptions to that, and I'll point out a couple. Oh, I didn't include him on this one. Oh, but you can. It's okay. I have one for St. Freddie of the Mercuries. We celebrate him in September 5th, because that's his birthday. That's when we do St. Freddie of the Mercuries. And if you wonder why I consider him to be a saint, you can read his stuff on September 5th on my blog. But yeah, most of these are the days they died. Oh, Matthias Grunewald. Has anybody heard of Grunewald? He's a Lutheran, by the way. Grunewald? Anybody? Raise your hands? No? Okay, come. He's an artist. There's the Grunewald Guild that still operates out in western United States. You can go there. I believe it's in Oregon. Is it Washington? Somebody will have to look it up. It's an artist colony that's out there. Grunewald, though we don't know his real name. That's the thing, because he went under a pseudonym his whole life. His original name was Gerhard, but we don't know the other parts. And he often added his spouse's surname, Neithar, to his signatures. He was under the patronage of Rome, but Grunewald was an admirer of the Reformation. And so even though he was working for the Vatican, he was secretly a reformer and really loved it. Oh, it's in Washington State. Look, I memorized. I looked it up there. And so you can check out the Grunewald Guild. You can even stay there at the Grunewald Guild and do some art. They have residency programs that are there. And this is one of his paintings. This is the Resurrection. The church always sponsored art is the reason I bring him up. Because, well, imagine this. You're living in the 15th century, and then you walk into a church, and through the stained glass windows, you see colors that you've never seen before. Stained glass windows were the first multimedia. This is our multimedia, but stained glass windows were the first multimedia. Churches were the place where those things were made and bred and kept. And that's why it's important for the church to still be a place where art is known and seen. Art takes us to a transcendent place. This painting, I don't love it that Jesus is like uber white, but it's a powerful painting. It's wonderful. It takes you to another place. The church still needs to be involved in this sort of stuff because it takes us to that transcendent place. And Matthias Grunewald, or whatever his name is a reminder of that. All right, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right? Very much in the now, right? Because they got that new movie coming out, which is based off of a terrible biography. His is April 9th, 20th century. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was an admirer of Hitler. People forget that. He started off admiring Hitler. Because the German people were in a time where they felt like they needed something. They needed someone. They wanted someone to do something for them. And Hitler promised them things, right? So he was an admirer of Hitler, but then he went off and he spent time at Union Seminary where he was a visiting lecturer there. And at Union Seminary in New York City, he learned other ways of being in the world. And he heard other things. And he realized that his small cultural mindset was not expansive enough to really see through what Hitler was doing. And when Hitler started amassing power in Germany, Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, I have to get back over there to help out with the confessing church, the underground church, because the church was involved in being subversive against Hitler. Not all the church. The professed Lutheran church and the professed Catholic church were in lockstep with Hitler. They told people to vote for him. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer goes back to London. He gets as far as London, and he's visiting there, and then everything goes to crap in Germany, and so then he makes his way to Germany. And in Germany, he becomes one of the training professors of the underground seminary, which are training pastors to be subversive preachers, preaching against Hitler. He was captured on April 5th, 1943, shortly after proposing to the love of his life. An attempt on Hitler's life had failed the previous year, and documents were discovered that linked Saint Dietrich to the plot. Now, we don't know if those documents were legit or not. It could be that the SS was trying to link him to the plot and create these documents, but it was known, and Bonhoeffer did admit in quiet corners that he was involved in some sort of talk about how it probably was better for Hitler to die than live. And Bonhoeffer was a pacifist. He didn't believe in death, in killing, but he thought that this was bad enough that this probably should end, especially because he saw the concentration camps, because he was sent to them. So on Sunday, April 8th, 1945, just after concluding church services at the concentration camp where he was, two men with weapons emerged from the forest, not unlike the soldiers in the Garden of Gethsemane, and they said, "Prisoner Bonhoeffer, come with us." And he turned to the people that were helping him with church that morning that he was holding in the concentration camp. He turned to them and he said, "This is the end for me. It's the beginning." And then he was killed. He was hanged in Flossburg prison on April 9th, 1945. The thing about Bonhoeffer is that he is a conversion story. He was an admirer of Hitler, but came to see that the way that they were being controlled was dangerous and antithetical to what God was doing in the world. So, yes?
Wasn't he, when he was in New York, wasn't his theology informed by the black experience
That's kind of how, yeah, so that's kind of how he got out of that mindset, was being exposed to other ways of being in the world. He met other folks. This is the only way, by the way, that mindsets are changed. We fall in love with other people. We fall in love with people, and then our mindsets change. Oh, St. Moses the African. He's one of my favorites. He's also a conversion story. So May 28th. So the reason that St. Moses is on the unusual saints is because he was a marauder. So St. Moses was an Ethiopian slave in Egypt, and his Egyptian owner or master, you can't own people, but the person who had enslaved him sent him away because he thought that Moses was stealing from him. So what Moses did is he got all these other people who were supposedly stealing from folks, and then they went and stole from folks. So they would go and they would maraud around the deserts, and they would ransack abbeys and monasteries. And he goes to this monastery, and he goes with these other folks to raid this monastery, and the monks were so nice to him, even though he was trying to like be a marauder and take all their stuff. They were so nice to him that he was like, I think I'd rather be nice than do this anymore. So he became a monk. He decided to become a monk. And not only did he become a monk, but he was made the abbot of his own monastery. And that was rare for a desert father to become a priest and an abbot at the same time. So he started being an abbot, and he was, for his monastery, and he was known for being wise and humble and a truly changed life. And in 405, his own monastery came under attack by the Berbers, and most of the other monks fled, but 8 of them lived, or 8 of them stayed at the monastery, and he showed the same compassion for the Berbers as he was shown when he was a marauder. But they killed him instead. So they were all killed, which is a martyr for the faith. And so he's now known largely as the patron saint of African Americans. But yeah, he's a cool conversion story. St. Moses the Black, St. Moses the African, he's known by a couple of different names. St. Moses the Ethiopian. Yeah, he's a cool story. Marsha P. Johnson. Anybody recognize Marsha P. Johnson? All right. She's 20th century. Her saint day, I propose, is March 30th. That's also Trans Awareness Day. It's March 30th. Malcolm Michaels Jr. in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Marsha lived her early lives in a town with little acceptance for those who identified as LGBTQ. This was in the 60s. When she turned 17, she came to New York City, and she took on the persona Black Marsha, which eventually morphed into Marsha P. Johnson, the Johnson taken from Howard Johnson Motels, and the P standing for Pay It No Mind, because people said, are you a boy or a girl? And she said, pay it no mind, right? She was known as low drag. That means she considered herself to be a drag queen, but she was low drag because she couldn't afford the fancy stuff. So she usually shopped at Goodwill's. And then she was involved in the Stonewall Inn raid in New York City, where she fought for folks to have rights. We forget that in 1969, it was illegal to be gay. It was illegal. That was the raid of Stonewall Inn right there. St. Marsha, though, was a practicing Catholic. She went to Mass all the time. She lit candles for those she loved. At the end of her life, she was taking care of her best friends who were dying in the AIDS epidemic. In the Pride Parade in 1992, St. Marsha P. Johnson was found dead in the Hudson River under mysterious circumstances right after. She's not, obviously, an official Catholic saint. I do propose her to be on the list of saints for the Lutheran Church. Philip Melanchthon. Anybody recognize Phil? Good old Phil? So, cool thing about Philip Melanchthon is he was 4'9". He was super short. I don't know if it's 4'9", but he was under 5 foot. Philip Melanchthon was the Siskel to Luther's Ebert. He was the Bert to Luther's Ernie. Luther would write things, and they would be so bombastic and so bad that Philip would go, "Are you sure you want to lead with that?" and he would edit them. But the cool thing that you don't know about Philip Melanchthon that you should know is he is the originator of a social safety net. He set up in Germany the social safety net and the social education system that still exists in Germany today and was imported in not so many ways here. He would have been a proponent for Social Security. He thought that Jesus' call to care for the poor, the widows, the orphans actually meant you do those things. And so he set up systems so that the German social class could do that. He set up systems so that every kid in Germany could go to a school regardless of their wealth or status. He set up those schools. Saint Philip published the Loci Communis, the first compilation of Lutheran doctrine ever assembled. But St. Philip was not only interested in theology. With Luther's help, St. Philip would go on and take on social issues in Germany, reorganizing schools and championing public education. It was St. Philip who would take the lead in the development of elementary and secondary education, making the study of the classics as the bedrock of public schooling. He was the person who put liberal arts as the bedrock for public schooling, which we still have today. He had kind of a tragic life. He had a bunch of kids. Many of them died. One of his first wives died. He lived a hard life. When Luther was called in front of Emperor Charles V, it was Philip who showed up and did the arguing for the Lutheran Church. He was a wonderful theologian, never a priest, never a monk, a layperson, super involved layperson. Any questions about good old Phil? He's a fascinating guy. His name, Melanchthon, by the way, probably means dark earth. That was not his original name, but he took it on, dark earth, probably for his family's farming heritage. All right, St. Alban. One of the reasons that St. Alban is on this list and as an unusual saint is because I don't think St. Alban was actually Christian. So St. Alban, I call him the master of disguise. He's the 4th century, commemorated on June 22nd when he was killed. The story goes that St. Alban, who was in Britain on the Roman expansion to Britain, so he's in Britain, and all of a sudden, banging on his door is a priest. And the priest said that the heathens want his head. There's a bounty out for him to be killed. Please shelter me. And Alban was a soldier. And so St. Alban takes him in, and when the authorities come banging on the door looking for the priest, St. Alban puts on all the priestly garb, gives the priest his garb, sends the priest out the back door. And when the soldiers come in and they see him dressed as the priest, they know it's St. Alban. They know it's him, but he says, nope, I'm the priest. It's me. I'm the guy. They're like, no, we know who you are. You're St. Alban, or you're Alban. And he goes, no, I'm the priest. Because nobody here is anybody that you can kill except for me. And so they take him and they kill him. He's the earliest identified person tied to the faith on the British Isles with a name that we know of. And I don't think he was even Christian. I just think he was a good person who knew that if somebody knocks on your door and asks, hey, do you have any of these people living here who we can take and arrest? You say, no. Nobody here is anybody you can take and arrest. Dag Hammarskjöld. Anybody recognize Dag? Yeah, he's great. Yeah. Cool thing about Dag and why he's on the list of unusual saints is because we didn't realize how deep his spiritual life was until after he died and we found his writings. His most influential work is Markings. Has anybody read Markings? Has anybody? Oh, you all need to read Dag. He's great. So his saint day was just last month, or 2 months ago, September 18th. Dag worked for the government. He was born in 1905, son of Sweden's prime minister. He studied law and economics. He was a professor of economics in Stockholm, and then he became the president of the board of the Bank of Sweden. On April 10th, Hammarskjöld was elected Secretary General of the United Nations. And during his tenure, he dealt with the end of the Korean War, skirmishes in the Middle East, and the Suez Canal crisis. And due to his acumen, he was elected for his second 5-year term as the Secretary of the United Nations. It's under debate on whether he wanted to stay in the role. It was very taxing on him. With another term in front of him, Dag set his sights on helping the newly independent Belgian Congo spread the UN troops to suppress the civil war there. And on his way to negotiate a ceasefire between the warring factions, Hammarskjöld was killed when his plane crashed in Zambia in 1961. It's pretty clear now that his plane was shot down. Upon his death, his reflections and mystical visions were published in a fascinating book that still sits on my shelf called Markings. In this work, Dag showed that he was not only a peacemaker of the world, but sought inner peace as well. And he has this wonderful line, which is one of my favorite. I am the vessel, the draught is God's, and God is the thirsty one. He just had these wonderful mystical visions and lines. He's great. So look up Dag if you're not familiar. He's a great one. Any questions on Dag? All right, Jehu Jones. Anybody know who Jehu Jones is? First African-American Lutheran pastor. 19th century, September 28th. Jehu, his father was a proprietor at a hotel and had purchased the freedom of a number of slaves. These slaves attended St. John's Church in Charleston. You can still go to St. John's Lutheran Church in Charleston, South Carolina. It is the oldest African-American church in the country. Jones owned a pew there, and you can still go there. And it's ELCA. St. Jones traveled north to New York City, bearing a letter from the pastor of St. John's, testifying to his character and his acumen. He should be ordained. He was ordained the first official African-American Lutheran pastor in the Ministerium of New York on October 24th, 1832. And then he headed back to South Carolina to prepare for the ministry, except that South Carolina had made a law that if you were coming from another state and you had black skin, you could be arrested and reconscripted as a slave, no matter if you were free or not. So he couldn't go back to South Carolina. So he ended up in Philadelphia, leaving his whole family behind. He returned to New York City and then landed in Philadelphia with his wife and 9 children who came with him, where he was organized St. Paul's Church. When the Ministerium of Pennsylvania came on hard times, they took the title of the building away from him, though, and they refused to offer him any payment for it. St. John returned to the Ministerium of New York seeking help, and they refused to give him help too. Despite the success as a pastor, because he had a growing and booming church in Philadelphia, St. Jehu was met with roadblock after roadblock in his struggle to be a minister of the church. And he died on this day in 1852. And for Lutheran pastors of color, it is still usually about 2 years before they get a call, even after graduating seminary. He's a really fascinating guy. You should read up on St. Jehu. He's good. In fact, you can go to St. Jehu's church in New York now. We have St. Jehu's Lutheran Church organized there. Soren Kierkegaard, he's my favorite. And he's my favorite because he's the father of, thank you, existentialism. Yeah, the father of existentialism. And I've been told that after him, we only have one more, but then we have to go. Okay, so St. Kierkegaard, 19th century, November 12th, coming up. The reason that St. Kierkegaard is on the unusual saints, and he's actually not a saint in the Catholic Church, but I do propose him as a saint in the Lutheran Church, is because he was Lutheran. His training was in the Lutheran Church, but he struggled with the fact that the church would often say things and then do the opposite. And this really bothered him. He inherited a whole bunch of money, so he really didn't have to work a whole lot. And because he didn't have to work a whole lot, he did what a lot of folks who usually don't have any money but still can't do anything else, he wrote. And he wrote a lot of things under a nom de plume and published a number of his writings there and was criticized. And he took the criticism very personally. It caused him to enter into a largely deep depression. But he began publishing thoughtful works in earnest using the nom de plume. Some of them you will know, Either or, Fear and Trembling, The Concept of Dread, many others. The public assumed that these works were fanciful, thoughtful fiction, but in fact they were the inner workings of Kierkegaard's inner life. Many Many of them were around the fact that he wanted to be a Christian but couldn't muster the strength to do it. Many of them were around the fact that he wanted to be a part of the church but hated that the church said one thing and did another. Many of them were around the fact that he wanted to marry his wife but didn't think that he was good enough for her, marry his fiancée but didn't think he was good enough for her, and had a real hard time saying forever because he wanted to mean what he said. As a writer, Kierkegaard became open to public scrutiny and was engaged in more than a few public feuds with other publications who viewed his work as ridiculous. Soren did not take to being mocked and argued bitterly against his detractors, and all this sent him further into a pit of despair. His final issue, though, came when Kierkegaard heard officials from the Danish church spout what he identified as sterile theology. He said, "Your theology is weak. It doesn't ask anything of anyone." Soren, in his despair and distress, one day collapsed in the streets of Copenhagen at the age of 42. Doctors diagnosed him with some sort of bone disease. A month later, he collapsed and died on November 12th in 1855. Regardless of how it happened, he was not well liked when he was alive. He's deeply loved now by many of us who consider him to be kind of our patron saint, because I identify a lot with his big, deep questions. St. Johannes de, I'll think of it in a second. St. John the Obscure is basically what you would, the translation of it. Yeah. Any questions? We got one more. Ready? Good old Katie. There's Katie. Katharina von Bora Luther, 16th century. Her saint day is December 20th, right around Christmas, which I love. See, here's the thing about Katie Luther. She was born into impoverished nobility. Catherine von Bora then was sent to her early teens to live with a Cistercian convent and became a vowed nun at 16. On Easter Day in 1523, 12 nuns managed to escape the convent in herring barrels, if Laura is to be believed, right? At Luther's help, and at the urging of Luther's teaching, they sought marriage. Luther attempted to match her with another colleague, but Katharina protested that the 42-year-old Lutheran was the only one she would marry. So he tried to get her to marry a whole bunch of other people, and she was like, "It's you, Marty. I just want you." And Martin Luther, who did not think he was fit for marriage, and probably was not. I mean, the guy was so odd. Relented, and they got married. Catherine, or Katie, not only managed the bustling Luther home and all of their children, but also Luther's bustling schedule and guests. She was the organizer of the house. She was the steward. She ran the brewery, which was known as the Black Cloister, and their stables. The family brewery was there. In fact, she would give Luther would talk about how her beer was the best beer in the world and the only beer he really loved, which I thought is great. She also was kind of a medicine person. She would give Luther like homegrown remedies to do things, and we have one of his writings where he wrote home about eczema, because Luther had so many issues. His body was breaking down all over the place. He had kidney stones. He couldn't go to the bathroom. He writes about how after 9 days he finally was able to go to the bathroom and how glorious it was. And these are in his writings. But one of them is he had eczema, and he said, "You know what? The remedy of rubbing cow manure on my skin didn't work." So apparently Katie had told him that. Katie is remembered for her courage and bravery in leading the convent and marrying in response to God's call, her managerial and analytical mind, which Martin Luther found to be indispensable in his ministry, and her business savvy. She was a businesswoman. She was amazing. After Luther's death, Katie had to be moved around, and Melanchthon took care of her in many ways, took care of the family. But Katie had to be moved around a bit due to the unrest post-Reformation and the threats on her life. Her properties were ruined. This was in the Peasants' War. And while in transit, she fell from her horse and became injured and ill and died on December 20th in 1552. So this is the final slide. Two last words about saints. So I became interested in the saints because I think they lead miraculous lives, but also super ordinary lives. And from both the miraculous and the super ordinary, we can learn to see the miraculous things happening in our lives, even though we're so ordinary in so many ways. And I think that, to me, is really a gift. So thank you for your attention. If you do want to follow me on the Book of Faith, you're welcome to. I do post every day just about on different saints that come up throughout the day. And if I don't, then I usually put up some poetry or a quick picture of my kids or something like that. So thank you all.